welcome back to Heather's Corner. Today is a tutorial video on how to make a hanbok for a boy doll. I have patterns in my Etsy for the BTS sized one, the fashion doll, and an American Girl sized one. This video will show you how to do both. The main difference between these would be the detail on this neckband. The BTS doll uses a ribbon, while the AG doll has a piece of white cotton. Otherwise, the pattern is nearly the same. Everything else is the same directions, same pieces. Obviously, the size is different, so you need two different patterns. But for the tutorial's purposes, it's all the same. So we'll get to the very first step, which is cutting all these beautiful pieces out. Let's start the pattern by creating the pants, or the baji, as they're called in Korean. So the first thing we're going to do is zigzag them all around the edges. I'm doing this to secure my fabric because this fabric does fray. This is cut out from a pillowcase, which is why it has all these annoying creases. I have ironed this. Maybe my iron wasn't hot enough, but it's okay for me. If you want, go ahead and iron out all the creases. It does make it look really nice and crisp. So just kind of chain zigzag one after another, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the next step for sewing. If you don't want to zigzag, that's fine. If your material doesn't fray, awesome. Love finding material like that. And then we'll get to the next step in the pattern. I have finished my zigzagging. Look at that. Very nice. You may see some threads popping out. Just trim them. It's okay. Now the next step you're going to do is sewing the front seam. So the front seam is this curve. These are the front pieces. So put your pieces good side to good side. In this case, the pillowcase, there is no right or wrong side. And you're going to sew this curve so that when you open it, there's the front seam. Let's go do that. The front seam is done. Now the next ones to do are the side seams. So you're going to take one pant leg, and remember, good side to good side. Open it up. And sew it down the side. Totally can pin it together as they can move on you, and sew them back together. Here are our pants put together from the side and center seams. At this step, I like to take my mini iron and iron down the seams here. So press it flat, and then take an iron, and it makes the edge on the other side look real crisp. So I'm going to do that real quick on top of my ironing pad, and you'll see what I mean. So this is what the pants look like on this side before ironing. They're kind of like rounded at the seam. Trust me, there's going to be a difference. Once you iron it, it will look so much better. So we take our iron. I'm just going to do this bottom part. See, it's gonna lay better, lay flat against the doll's leg too. Look at that. It's flat compared to the upper part of the seam. That's kind of round. That's why I do this. So I'm gonna finish ironing this and then show you the next step. The next step is to sew the cuff to the pant leg. So you're gonna take your cuff, fold the right side lengthwise, and then pin it to the ends of your pants. Now this pattern is made to have bigger than needed cuffs and waistbands. It's because it makes it easier when sewing. If you have something a little bigger, so you know you can just cut it off, or if you make a mistake and something rips, you have a little extra. I've had that happen. That's why I do it. Also, when you zigzag, sometimes you might zigzag not close enough to the edge, or you take too much of the fabric in the zigzag. I've thought of that. Don't worry. So this is what it's going to look like once you pin it, and then you'll sew this down. Try to keep your sewing even on each end, otherwise the seams won't line up when you do the inner seam. So let's go sew that. So now both of the cuffs are sewn down. The next thing we're going to do is sew the waistband, and you'll use the same method for sewing the waistband as we did the cuffs. So find good side to good side on the waistband, fold it in half lengthwise, and then pin it to the edge when you sew. This too should also be longer than you need. Here's our waistband all attached. These are so simple to make. I love them. The next step is the Velcro. I like to do the Velcro before I do the inner seam. I find it's just easier to sew and manipulate. So what you're going to do is get your Velcro and cut a piece that fits in the flap area. Preferably like where my thumbs are. So let me go get one. Here's the Velcro piece I'm going to use. Nice size. So take it apart. And you're going to put one piece on top and one piece on the bottom. So you will fold over your flap and sew one here, and then fold the other flap over and sew one underneath, so that when it's together, it will Velcro. Let's go do that. Here's our Velcro, one on the top, one on the underside. Your next step is to sew the back seam. So this tiny little J underneath the Velcro. So make sure you line up the tops with the bottom of the curve and sew there. Almost done! This has been sewn, the back seam. Now all that's left is the inner seam. So what you're going to do is take your pant legs, line them up at the ends, line it up in the middle, and sew across. I find it easiest to pin right underneath the cuffs and sew them under the machine foot this way. That way, when it's going back, it does not misalign the cuff ends, because I've had too many times where I sew like this and then one cuff ends up pulling forward and the other one pulling under, and you get this. I don't like that. If you like it, totally fine to do it. If you're like me and don't like it, it's best to sew the ends first. And if you have some type of tearaway interfacing to help keep this stable, it's the best stuff ever. So I will come back when these baji are finished. Ta-da! Your baji are done. I turned mine around already and put the Velcro. If you find that this is pulling a little weird, put a few snips around the curve of this area. Don't cut your seam though, and it should relieve some of that tension. Here we are at step 11 to sew the jeogori. I'm going to call it shirt from now on so I don't butcher what it's called in Korean. So what you're going to do is zigzag the edges just like the baji pants. This material is fray. Again, if your material doesn't fray, no need to zigzag. I'll come back. The zigzagging is all finished, so you can see what it looks like. Your next step is to sew the cuffs of the sleeves. How you're going to do that is you're going to fold these together good side to good side. Since this is a cotton, there isn't really much of a difference in the white. And you're going to sew down these sides, straight and diagonal. Both of them. This is what your cuff should look like after you turn it around. Now you're going to sew down this open edge, which helps to keep the edges together while you're sewing it to the sleeve. All you need is like a size 3 or 4 stitch here. Don't have to go too small, but don't go too big so you don't want it to gather. Now it's time to attach the cuff to the sleeve. So I've pinned this one. I have the other one, and you're gonna pin this cuff to this end of the sleeve, like so. And then you're going to sew it down. It's totally okay if the cuff is a little bit bigger. I make the pattern have more tolerance in case there's mistakes or you've taken too much, to make it easier too, because nothing's worse than getting a sleeve cuff that is shorter than your sleeve and then you have to go and recut it. Here's what your sleeves should look like after attaching them. I've also pressed them flat to give them a crisper edge. Makes it look really nice. Now we are going to sew the fronts to the backs, well, the front to the back at the shoulder seam. This is what your front and back piece should look like. Next is time for the neckband, and you're going to fold it in half just like the cuffs and sew down the edges, the side edges that is, and then turn it around. After you do the corners, turn it around and sew the open sides down, just like the cuffs. And once that's done, we're going to pin it to the top. So to do that, you'll fold your band in half, take a pin to mark where the middle is, and take another pin and mark where the middle is on the back piece. So I fold it in half, try to meet up my shoulder seams. Like that. And now we're going to pin it together. This is what your pieces should look like all pinned together. It may also help if you press the shoulder seams flat. It lays better. Neckband is all sewed on. Next, I'm going to press it flat to give me a flatter edge so I can top stitch this down. That way it stands up. I top stitched my neckband. Now my next step is to do the sleeves. So what you're going to do is take your sleeve, fold it in half, find the middle with a pin, turn it around so it's good side to good side on the shirt and the sleeve, and match up the pin to the shoulder seam so it's right in the middle. You're going to pin the sleeve to the shirt like so, and once you have it pinned, just sew a straight line. The sleeves are sewed on. Now to do the side seam or the underarm seam. So to do that, you're going to line up your sleeves and side piece, pin them together, and sew. So pin them together to keep them held, and sew around. Make sure that these match as best as they can. It may be helpful to sew the cuff first, just going this way, so that it doesn't move on you under the foot, and to sew on top of interfacing, tearaway interfacing. And if these bottom pieces don't match up perfectly, it is okay, because there's going to be a bottom band, so you can just cut off the excess after you've done the bottom band. Your side seam is now done. It is best now if you turn it around, and it may help to use hemostats or pliers to grab these little sleeves, and try it on your doll, because a common mistake at this step is to sew the cuffs too narrow and you can't get the doll's hand through, or to sew the armpit area too narrow and you can't get the doll's upper arm through. So once you make sure this fits, turn it back around and put a few small cuts here to relieve the tension so that this doesn't pull oddly when the doll is wearing it. Be careful not to cut your seams here. Almost done with the top. The next step is to sew the waistband on. And you sew it on just like the baji pants. So if you remember, you're going to fold it in half and pin it to the bottom, then sew a straight stitch. And if your bottom pieces don't line up, as you see mine, try to be careful sewing this as straight as you can. So otherwise, your shirt will have like an uneven hem. And then after, you can just trim off this excess. The waistband is all attached. To create an area for your snaps, you will fold over about 1/2 inch from the edges on both front pieces, and then lay the left over the right, and see how well that looks, how nice. Sometimes you may have to take more or less. And then it is easiest to press these so that they have a crisp seam, and then we will sew a line here to keep it pressed down, and it creates a flap for you to sew on, and it hides your stitching for the top piece. Here is your shirt with the flaps sewn down. So now, let's put it on the doll to find the exact place to put your 2 snaps. Here is the shirt on my JK doll. I clip the bottom edges together to keep them even while I find my snap placement. I put the male ends of the snaps on the underside, so it makes it easier to find exactly where the snaps are placed when sewing the other side on the top. So here I'm going to lift the left side to see how far over they go. and where I should place them. So I should put one around here, so it's covered by the flap, and then probably one around here. So let me put a pin where I want the middle of the snap to be, and put another pin. And you want to make sure these are sort of even, and by even I mean going in the same line. So I'm going to move this pin over a little. And when I sew the snap on, I'm only going to sew onto this one piece of fabric. I won't sew it through the flap, so I find it can get quite tangled. Sewing through the flap becomes harder for me to push the needle through, and I don't want to hurt my hands. Here are the male ends of the snaps sewn on. As you see, I didn't sew on the flap, so I can stay behind. If you find this is pushing up on you, just sew a few stitches down here and it'll stay put. Now, here is how I attach the other side of the snap. So you're going to fold over the left side and make sure the bottoms are even. And then pin or clip it together so it stays even. Now, feel around for the snap underneath. You'll feel the pointy part through here, and place a pin around that area. I usually stick it straight through. It goes down here. Oh, there it is. Somewhere around there. Then unclip it and take the female end of your snap, stick it on the pin if it has a hole, and then you can begin sewing these female ends of the snaps to just the flap. So put one stitch in, then you can take your pin out and start sewing it. I usually sew a stitch in each of these little holes and then fold it over and see if it reaches the other end of the snap first, because you may have sewed it in the wrong place and it'll be like this and it won't snap together. And then just sew the rest of the snap on and you've basically finished the shirt. So I'll come back when this is done. The shirt is all finished. Yay! Give yourself a pat on the back, because these do take a little bit to make, especially on your first try. So I have the snaps done on both sides. It looks great. On to the last piece of the hanbok, the durumagi, I believe is pronounced, or an overcoat. I'm going to zigzag all the edges. Since this frays, if your material doesn't fray, you'll need to zigzag. Move on to the next step. Here is the overcoat zigzagged. Sometimes the zigzag will make your edges turn in a little. That's okay. The pattern has tolerance and it'll still fit. Now, the next step is to do the neckband. For the BTS dolls, I put the white accent on with ribbon, just by cutting a piece that's a little longer on each side and sewing 2 lines of stitching down on each side of the ribbon. On an American Girl doll size, it has a little more steps. Let's complete this neckband. So just like the neckband on the shirt, you're going to fold it in half and sew the corners. Now the ribbon may make it a little tough to fold in half, so feel free to use all the pins you need. The corners are sewn. I turned it around and now I'm going to do a stitching line here to keep the edges in place. I have them clipped because this material does not stay together well. It just kind of opens up. And then just like the shirt, you're going to attach it to the neckline. I sewed the bottom edge of this together, and now we can sew the shoulder seams of the overcoat right here. Here is the neckband for the American Girl version of the overcoat of the hanbok. This is a little tricky in my opinion, so you gotta take it slow. What you're gonna do is take the white part and place it off center, doesn't matter which side, and sew a straight line down. Now, fold over the white piece and iron down this edge to create a nice crisp seam. After ironing this seam, fold this side under about 1/4 inch and iron it flat. Top stitch this edge down. To finish the neckband, follow the same steps you used for the shirt and the ones I used for the BTS doll, which is sew the corners, turn it around, top stitch the edge together, and then line it up to the neckline. The shoulder seams are now sewn. We're going to take our neckband, fold it in half, find the middle, put a pin. And then do the same thing here. Fold it in half, find the middle, put a pin. Sometimes with the neckbands, one side will look better than the other in terms of the way the ribbon is laying. So pick the one that you like best and start attaching it to the neckline. Pin it around. Here's the neckband pinned to the neckline. Make sure when you sew you grab both edges. It could be real easy for one of these to slip down. Just be careful. Once this neckband is sewn on, iron the seam flat and then top stitch. The neckband has been ironed and top stitched. Now you are going to hem the sleeve holes. Make sure that when you flip this over, the slits for the sleeve holes are even. If one is in a different place than the other, then go with the one that's lower down. You want to make sure you have enough space. The sleeve holes are hemmed. Now, sew the side seam. This is from under the sleeve hole into the split in the pattern. The side seams are sewn. Now, hem the split. So you just fold it over, sew it down, fold it over, sew it down. Even here, you can hem it. Just takes a little bit of finessing. The splits were hemmed. Now you're going to hem the bottom. Make sure to make them as even as possible. It can be a little tricky since these are not connected and they may be a different length. Try your best. Here are the decorations I chose for this hanbok. I have these mini tassels that I brought on AliExpress. And then I made a little bead charm using the earring pins I got at Michael's. And then I just tied them with a knot or two with the ribbon. You can also loop these through and hand sew them. It's totally fine. You could take braided rope cord that's used for decoration and make a belt. Or take some hemp cord and braid it yourself and make a belt, ones that wrap around. Lots of cool things you can do to make these hanboks. Here's what the American Girl size hanbok looks all put together. These are so gorgeous. I love the way they come out every single time. This concludes the end of this tutorial video. I know it was a bit of a long one, but there are quite a few pieces to this outfit, and it can get a little tedious to do, so it had to be a little longer. Here's the details. I matched the tassels, and I didn't put any beads or charms, but totally feel free to do so. Just like with the small doll, you can use rope cord and braid hemp cord to do the belts and things like that. I do not know how to make the hats. believe they're called gats. This is out of my skill set right now. If you do, please tell me about it in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I really hope this tutorial helps you in sewing these beautiful outfits. If you have any questions at all, please leave a comment or email me. My email's in the pattern, or message me on Etsy. I really would love to help you with these because I know how complicated it can be. It can get a little frustrating at times. Don't fear, I'm here to help you. I will see you all in my next video. Say bye to Double Googie. Bye.